This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Today, I reached back into my archives, one of my most favorite guests, Walter Williams, American economist, commentator, academic. He's the John M. Olin Distinguished Professor of Economics at George Mason University, which happens to be my alma mater. It does not happen to be the reason that he's on this show, because I reached out to him cold and said, Dr. Williams, would you like to come on to my show? Here's what it's all about. And he said yes. And what follows is our conversation. I am so damn lucky that I get to have people on this podcast like Walter Williams. I get to keep learning and pushing, and you get to come along for the ride. We are all lucky. Again, reaching back into my archive, Walter Williams. I hope you enjoy. Hey, listen, here's where I want to start with something kind of fun. I'm jealous, I'm envious, I want to intellectually steal something from you, and it's what you describe yourself as. And I just love this. You call yourself a radical. It's not fair. That's not fair if you do that first. I love it.
Okay.
Why do you call yourself a radical?
Well, because my vision's part company with most people. Most people believe that one person should be forcibly used to serve the purposes of another, and so and that includes a welfare stance, business bailouts, and all this kind of stuff. And I disagree with that position.
So let me jump into something specific: the morality of markets. A lot of people that don't understand markets and the benefits of markets often get upset when they contemplate the idea that there's a loser. But there's often a zero-sum nature of markets. And how do people get so confused on how markets can be a negative thing? Good, fair, honest markets. I'm not talking about crony capitalism or bailouts of banks, but good, honest markets. How can there be something bad about that?
Well, I think people don't understand, and they've been miseducated, and they've been subject to a lot of propaganda. Now, when I talk about the morality of markets, or when I make the case for the morality of markets, I don't start off talking about markets. I make the assumption that I, Walter Williams, am my property. I belong to myself, and you belong to yourself. And so when you start off with the basic assumption that each of us owns ourselves, then certain acts are immoral and other acts are moral. For example, the reason why murder is immoral is because it violates private property rights. Rape is immoral. It violates private property rights. And so is theft. Theft is immoral because it violates private property rights. Now, a free market, the system of a free market or institution of a free market, acknowledges the fact that people own themselves. Now, so if I own myself, then I have the right to engage in peaceable, voluntary exchange with anyone else. That is, if I want to buy tomatoes from you, then it's my business and it's your business, and it's no right of a third party to come in and say, well, no, we're going to cancel that exchange, or we think that it's better that Walter Williams buys tomatoes from an American producer. And so I think that the basis for arguing for a free market lies in the moral philosophy that was spoken about by John Locke centuries ago. You know, that the idea of self-ownership. And self-ownership means just many things. That is, self-ownership means that you cannot be forced to serve the purposes of somebody else. And this is what government welfare programs are, or government bailout programs. They're forcing one person to serve the purposes of another. Now, forcing one person to serve the purpose of another, that's a working definition for slavery. That is because slavery forces one person to serve the purpose of another, forcibly uses them. And so does the welfare state. It forcibly, the money, in other words, the money that government uses for food stamps, bailouts, it doesn't come from the tooth fairy. It doesn't come from Santa Claus. The only way that government can give one American citizen $1, or any citizen anywhere, money, but give one American, since we're talking about, I'm talking about America, to give one American $1, it must forcibly take that $1 from somebody else. That is some other American. That is, government cannot give one American citizen $1 without first taking that $1 from some other American. And so when you take that $1 from some other American, you are forcing him to serve the purpose of somebody else.
Very clear. And I know you're one of your maybe if not your largest motivation is as an educator to teach. But I think it would be good for my audience. I know many of my audience are going to be familiar with you, but born 1936, Philadelphia. And I've seen you describe yourself, your family, to say, we were poor, but we didn't think that way. And that's such a brilliant piece of advice. Even if it was just a description of your situation, it's still brilliant advice. Why don't you talk about the idea that you didn't think you were poor? You didn't think poor.
Well, my mother used to say, she used to tell us that we have a beer pocketbook, but we have champagne taste. And that is, matter of fact, I'm born in 1936, and back then, if you called somebody poor, that was an insult. Because we didn't think of ourselves as poor people. We thought of ourselves as struggling people trying to do better. And matter of fact, the values at that time were much different from the values today, and particularly among black people. That is, we did not have the welfare mentality. We did not buy into the welfare state. Some of the pathology that you see today was completely absent in the 30s and 40s, and 50s when I was growing up. And when I talk about particular pathology, the high illegitimacy rate among black Americans of over 70%, I think it's close to 75%. Well, back in the 1940s, it was like 12 or 13%. Or the breakup of the family, and matter of fact, back in the 1870s, 70-some% of black kids lived in two-parent families, compared to today, when somewhere around only 30% of black kids live in two-parent families, and in some cities, such as New York City, it's far less than that. And so, I think that when we were coming up, there was a different attitude. There was pride. I mean, to tell somebody, the one way to insult your friend is to say your mother's on relief, and that's what we called welfare back then. And to be on relief was an insult. And matter of fact, my stepfather used to always tell me that any kind of job is better than begging and stealing. Now, that's not the attitude for people today. A lot of people say, "Look, I'm not going to work at McDonald's for $7-something an hour. I'd much rather be on welfare. I'd much rather be begging for money."
In fact, when you bring up working at McDonald's, and I'd like for you to go into your description, your explanation about the idea of minimum wage. And I think for a lot of people, they hear about minimum wage and maybe they have some money or they have some success. And the idea of minimum wage it sounds noble. It sounds beneficial to those that don't have. However, I think there's something more nefarious about minimum wage, and I'd like for you to expand on that.
Well, I think that most people support the minimum wage out of good intentions. They want their fellow man to have a higher wage, to be better off. And that's a fairly decent motivation. But when one has policy, when one forms public policy, he shouldn't pay attention to the intentions behind the public policy. He should ask, what is the effect of public policy? What is the effect of the minimum wage? And you see the effect of the minimum wage if you put yourself in the place of an employer, and you must pay $7.25 an hour to no matter whom you hire. And actually, $7.25 an hour is not your minimum cost, because you have to pay mandated benefits such as Social Security, unemployment compensation, and other fringes. But let's stick with $7.25, the current minimum wage in the United States. Now, if you must pay $7.25 an hour to no matter whom you hire, will you hire that worker who is so unfortunate so as to have skills that will only enable him to produce $4 worth of value per hour? In other words, would you pay somebody $7.25 when that somebody can only produce $4 worth of value? Well, most employers would look at that as a losing economic proposition. So they just would not hire such a person. And who are these people? Well, it's a low-skilled worker. The minimum wage law, one of the first effects of the minimum wage law is to discriminate against the employment of low-skilled workers. And it turns out in most economies, the lowest skilled workers are teenagers. They have low skills because they lack the experience and work attitudes and other attributes of adults. And among that number are black teenagers who not only share the handicaps of teenagers in general, but they share the additional handicaps of going to rotten schools, very often living in broken families and pathological neighborhoods. And so if you are predicting who would the greater unemployment effects of the minimum wage law, you would say, well, gee, it would have a devastating impact on the employment opportunities for teenagers, and doubly so on minority teenagers. And if you look at the empirical data, that's what it shows. One thing that people don't know, I did a study called Youth and Minority Unemployment for the Joint Economic Committee of Congress in 1976 or 78, somewhere around there. And in 1948, black teenage unemployment was 9.4%. White teenage unemployment was 10.2%. Compared to today, white teenage unemployment is around 20-some percent, and black teenage unemployment is over 40%. And the labor force participation rates of blacks were greater during the 40s and 50s than whites. That is, labor force participation means that blacks were more active in the labor market than were white teenagers. And today, it's entirely the opposite. Now, there's one other thing about the minimum wage law that people don't understand. It destroys employment opportunities. Again, when I was a kid, when you pull into a gasoline station, there was a youngster to wash your windows, check the air in your tire, and maybe check your hood. Now today they're self-service stations, and they're not self-service stations today because Americans love the smell of gasoline fumes while they're gassing up the cars. Another example of a job disappeared when I was a youngster. There were in movie theaters that had ushers to show you to your seat. Today, there are no ushers in movie theaters, and it's not because Americans that they like to stumble down the aisles in the dark to find their seat. And just one other effect of the minimum wage, other than destroying jobs and causing premature automation, minimum wages are one of the most effective tools in the arsenal of racists everywhere around the world. In 1989, I wrote a book called South Africa's War Against Capitalism. And So I did a study of labor markets in South Africa, and I found that, and I give many, many quotes in the book, of racist labor unions, South Africa racist labor unions, that would never have a black as a member, were the major supporters of minimum wage laws for blacks. And their stated reason was to make the wages so high for blacks that they would not be hired. And you see the motivation, that is, companies would hire a laborer, and they had to pay a white guy. I think this is like 1980 statistics. They might have to pay a white worker $3 an hour, but they get away hiring a black for 50 cents an hour to do the same job. So you see the incentive of the contractors was to hire blacks. Now, if the white workers could force the black wages closer to $3, then it would be reduced incentive for contractors to hire black workers.
You know, Dr. Williams, you surely faced discrimination at various points in your life, but you are one of the most positive, and it's one of the reasons I want to have you on. You're one of those positive, inspiring people, and you just want to listen. And I think this is why millions of people, when they hear you on the radio, maybe filling in for Rush or something, they just love you. But how did you avoid bitterness? Like, why did you stay so positive, even when you probably had to face issues that as a white kid that I didn't have to face growing up? How did you stay so positive?
I don't know. I think I think that one of the things that's different about our country that was not around today and not around in yesteryear is that people were concerned about, people today are concerned about people's self-esteem. They're concerned about not hurting anyone's feelings by telling them the truth. They want like if they've had handicaps, they want special privileges or special help. Now, when I was a youngster, my mother used to tell me, look, Walter, there is discrimination. There's racial discrimination, and you know what that means? It means that you have to be better. You have to try harder. And that's the kind of lessons I got. Or with my stepfather, he would say, look, if you want to make it in this world, you have to learn to come early and stay late. And so those were the kind of values that I grew up with, and being bitter about something doesn't help out at all. I mean, that is the way you get even, if you're concerned with getting even, is to work hard and accomplish more. And today, that is not quite the attitude. People think, well, there should be some kind of compensation for slavery. There should be some kind of consideration for years of injustice that black people suffered. And this kind of thing, taken into consideration, the discrimination and handicaps that blacks have had, has been devastating. That is where professors in colleges, black students are admitted to colleges on much lower standards than white students. Sometimes when they're in college, professors give them a break, give them a C or give them a B when they should get an F in the class, and those kind of things. That kind of treatment does not help, and so anyway, I just don't share the philosophy that many people share today, both black and white, I might add.
You know, some in the audience might be thinking, well, you know, you sound like part of the establishment. Other people have had a harder time, but if I look back at some of preparing to speak with you today. You had a fondness more for Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King, so you were willing to fight even more.
Oh yes, and I might say that a black person living today, he has not seen things that I've seen, things like signs posted, colored waiting room, colored water fountain, colored entrance. And he has not seen any lynching and all these horrible things that's part of our history. And matter of fact, the average poor black person or the average poor American in general, you have statistics like 60% of them own at least one car. that the people that the Census Department defines as poor, 60-some% of them own at least one car, and 14% two or more cars. Poor people have 90-some% of poor people have microwaves. They have a large number have cable TVs. The average poor person has more living space to live in than middle class people in Europe and other parts of the world, and particularly in Southeast Asia. And so poverty today is, and there's no poverty in the United States. That is, there's no material poverty in the United States because poor people are much better off than they were in the 40s and 50s. Now, what we do have is spiritual poverty of the spirit, where people have adopted certain kinds of pathological lifestyles, dependency, crime, illegitimacy, family breakdown. And these are devastating things, but it's no more material poverty, and not the kind of material poverty that I saw. For example, my wife, she was the youngest of 11 children. And her father, we're both young. I'm 78, and my wife, if she were still alive, she'd be 81. But her father used to have to move his family into abandoned buildings and maybe jerry-rig the electricity so they can have some light and maybe some heat. Now, you don't find that kind of stuff going on today in the United States.
Yeah, speaking of jerry-rigging, I can walk out my door here in Saigon and I can see the jerry-rigging of the wires just about everywhere.
Yeah, right.
It's quite different. Hey, let me shift into a bigger picture issue. So how did you feel as an economist, a free market mindset, in the fall of 2008 when the Fed, government officials decided to let Bear Stearns go under, let Lehman Brothers go under, but then they saved Goldman Sachs, they saved Morgan Stanley. And I think, sometimes people on the right want to always say about critics of, they want to criticize the left. They say, hey, we want to do away with welfare. But you know what? I have a big problem with Goldman Sachs welfare. I have a big problem with Morgan Stanley welfare. And I think sometimes that gets glossed over. How did you feel when you realized we were bailing out speculative ventures in the fall of 2008? It wasn't a good thing, was it?
Well, no, it was not. I think that if you want to find the question why Goldman Sachs the big financial firms are bailed out, you look at who was the ex-Secretary of Treasury and the kind of impact they had in Washington, and that's why they got bailed out. But I think that what bailing out does, it conceals a lot of the foolhardiness of previous administrations, namely the Bush administration, with the idea that everybody should be a homeowner, and they were keeping interest rates artificially low, and when you keep interest rates artificially low, it gives people incentives to invest when they should not invest. And in buying a house and in buying a business, and there's a comeuppance to it, and that comeuppance came in 2007, 2008, when people began to question the worthiness of all this debt that had been created, and in the housing market was devastating. That is, they were making liar loans. That is, banks were knowingly giving mortgages to people who could not afford it. But what the hell, the bank care? Because Fannie Mae and Ginnie Mae and the Federal Reserve was buying the paper. Yeah. And so it just got them off it gets everybody off the hook. And you're absolutely right that handouts to wealthy people is just as bad as handouts to poor people. There's no justification for either.
Yeah, I agree completely. Big picture, to me, if I look at my home country, I don't know if I see left and right anymore. I sort of see one group of people that wants the state to take care of a lot of things, and the other group just says, state, go away. And I don't know what the percentages are. To me, it feels like the numbers and percentages of people that want the state to step in and handle everything just seems to be growing. And I think the issue that troubles me is like, how did people come to have this much respect for bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.? I mean, you and I know, for example, how much wealth has been created in the Northern Virginia area in real estate. And it's not the result of free market economics. It's the result of government employees that get guaranteed salaries and they make a ton of money and they jack these prices up. But how do we get to this point where people want to trust the states so much? What triggered? What went wrong?
Well, it's fairly difficult for me to put my finger on any one source, but I think that if you had to tie it down to a bedrock cause, I would say it's a result of a generalized contempt and disrespect for the United States Constitution. That is what the average American wants Congress to do things that for which there's no constitutional authority for Congress to do. I mean, for example, to give you an idea, James Madison is the acknowledged father of the Constitution. So you kind of guess that James Madison would know what's in the Constitution. And in 1794, Congress appropriated $15,000 to help some French refugees. And James Madison stood on the floor of the House irate. And he said, and I'm virtually quoting him, and these quotes are on my website, walterewilliams.com. James Madison stood on the floor of the House irate, and he said, I cannot undertake to lay my finger on that article in the Constitution that authorizes Congress to spend the money of their constituents for the purposes of benevolence. Now, if you look at the federal budget today, 2/3 through 3/4 of it is for the purposes of benevolence. Madison also said that charity is not a legitimate function of government. Now, you take a politician today running for office, wanting to be the president of the country, like James Madison, and if he said during his campaign that charity is not a legitimate function of government, if he said that what James Madison said, he can't find anything in the Constitution to authorize spending for the purpose of benevolence, that person would never be elected to office by the American people. The American people would have just contempt for an idea that government should not be in the business of helping, of using, should not be in business of giving one person's earnings to another person. And any senator running for office or congressman saying the same thing, he'd be run out of town on a rail. That is, if I were the senator running for the Senate in any state, conservative or liberal state, and say Virginia, and I'm running for the Senate in Virginia, and I go back and forth across the country, and I say, look, my fellow Virginians, I've read the United States Constitution, and I'm going to respect the Constitution. So if you elect me to office, don't expect for me to bring back highway construction funds, aid to higher education, Medicare, et cetera, et cetera. I would not get elected to office by the citizens of Virginia. The tragedy is that Virginians would be acting exactly right by not electing me to office, but they elected me to the Senate. Why? Because if I don't bring back billions and billions of dollars for the citizens of Virginia, that doesn't mean that Virginians will pay a lower federal income tax. All that it means is that Maryland will get it instead. That is, once legalized theft begins, it pays for everybody to participate in it, and those who do not participate in it are going to wind up as losers because they will not benefit. There's no benefit whatsoever except moral satisfaction, but there's no financial, economic benefit from people not participating in the handout game, and that's the tragedy of it.
Yeah, and I don't see how that shifts anytime soon. I think it's
and so what I'm saying, if you're expecting for it to shift, look, I've asked people, I say, is there any difference? Is there any basic human difference between Americans and Romans, the Spanish, the French, the Portuguese, and the English? These are great empires of the past, but they went down the tubes for precisely what we're doing. And so, is there anything to exempt us from what happened to these other great nations of the past? And I reluctantly observe no, because we have lost our love in our nation. We've lost our love for liberty. And the true tragedy of liberty failing in the United States, because if liberty is lost in the United States, I believe that it will be lost all times and all places forever.
Something strong for people to think about. I think it's, I share your view. I think you've made a strong case for it. Hey, I have one quick question, just kind of a personal thing. So as a guy who calls himself a radical, a man who stands on stage and has no problem taking the slings and arrows, how have you developed the thick skin to deal with criticism? There's a lot of people out there that they don't want to stand up. They're afraid of what their friends are going to say. They're afraid of what their family's going to say. They don't want to stand outside the crowd. Walter Williams clearly has no problem being outside the crowd. So how did you learn this ability to not let criticism eat you up?
Well, it does involve me. Matter of fact, a lot of criticism I find very helpful. Because criticism is the way to learn. Criticism is a way to learn, maybe to explain your message in another way. And then on top of it, I have a rich physical endowment. I'm 6'5", so people have to think twice before, that makes you less subject to intimidation. And then it's no longer applicable today. But when I was in the Army, I had a lot of problems in the Army. I was stationed Fort Stewart, Georgia, and one time an officer told me, Williams, with all these things you're doing, you're going to get in trouble. And so I said, what kind of trouble can you possibly get me in? Are you going to paint me black and send me to Georgia? I'm already in trouble.
Hey, you say 6'5", but I noticed somewhere that you recently found out in the last bunch of years that your second cousin was Dr. J, so he had a few more inches on you, huh?
Oh, yes, he did. Yeah, yes, he did. Yes.
Hey, Dr. Williams, where is the best place that the audience can go to find out more information about you?
Well, they can go to my website. It's walterewilliams.com. walterewilliams.com. And then also, what I will send to you, if you don't let me forget, there's the Free to Choose people. These are the people who made the Milton Friedman's series, Free to Choose. They've made a documentary on my life. They'll be coming out in the fall. And so what I'll do is I'll try to and a matter of fact, the title of the documentary is called "Suffer No Fools." And what I'll try to do is to send you a preview of it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
The Free to Choose has sent out I think it's like a 6-minute preview.
That'd be great. Maybe we can circle back on a follow-up conversation when it comes out, perhaps. But
yeah, right. And then it has also has a place where you can be notified when it's going to be aired and other particulars.
It's tough to hang up with you. I got to go, but I tell you, because I can't keep you all day. But I could sit here for hours and pick your brain. I'm sure your students feel the same way sometimes. But hey, listen, I appreciate you giving my audience all your great insights, and hopefully we can talk again in the future.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.